There's basically 5 ways that AI can help BPOs.
I'm here with Nick Clark. Nick, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Elvis. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's really great to see you again as well.
Great, great. You are partner and director at BCG, and your focus is customer experience excellence.
Yes, customer experience, customer service, all of that good stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay. So I want to try to understand things that I'm going to have some questions that I actually don't have answers for. So I see two narratives out there in the world, and I want to ask you, first of all, if you see them differently, please tell me. If I'm
Hmm.
stuck in some kind of echo chamber, please help me out of it. So the one narrative I see is this, what I would call the Silicon Valley narrative, which I would see like Andreessen Horowitz and Y Combinator, which is like the decagons of this world are just gonna like take over BPO. It's just gonna, we don't need people because this stuff is near AGI and we're gonna like AI is gonna do customer experience end to
Hmm.
end soon. And we're just really close away from that. And the other narrative is the large BPOs, which, if I listen to their earnings calls, they're also all in on AI. They're also, they sound like AI consultancies. They don't sound like they have 500,000 people in their back office. They sound like they're nimble and they're helping clients implement AI, but they're doing it with their people, with their, some of them call them change makers. They're they're humans. And their point is that a lot of the things that for the large BPOs have been table stakes, the what I would call younger AI experts in Silicon Valley, actually those are unknowns for them. They don't even, sometimes maybe even unknown. They don't even know
Mm.
that that's a problem for them when they come. They don't know how to sell this stuff. They don't know. They don't have the relationships. Now, those two narratives, who's going to prevail? Because also, and there's maybe a third one, is that if I look at the head count, and this is really what I'd love to get into maybe in the second half of the interview, is the
Hmm.
head count actually, like, are BPO jobs growing or shrinking, and where in the world? Is it a trade? Is it shrinking in the global north but growing in the global south, staying about the same, or is it shrinking everywhere because of AI? Or does it have nothing to do with AI? It's just for different reasons, right? Macroeconomic
Hmm.
reasons that the sector, the BPO sector isn't doing so well, and people in the media and commentary are conflating the two. They're seeing AI, they're seeing BPO isn't doing so great, and they're saying, well, they must have something to do with each other. Can you somehow untangle that huge knot that I just laid on your plate?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a really good basis for a 30, 40 minute conversation. So
Right, right.
let's see where we go with that. I mean, look, I really like your framing up front. I think obviously, so you've kind of got those 2 points of view. I think I definitely hear those, those broad archetypes of those 2 points of view, and some others as well. But I think, of course, the first thing to remember is those two archetypes that you described, the Silicon Valley VC firms and BPOs or companies that let's describe them as maybe they have a large legacy businesses. Both of those players have quite a bit of skin in the game here. So of course they're both going to be keen to present a narrative that represents what they're trying to do in the best possible light. I think where I would come at that would be, and from a lot of the conversations I've had with people across the industry, is there are some unknowns, right, in the future. There are some unknowns about how fast the technology is going to progress, how quickly it's going to get adopted, what people are going to use it for. But there are plenty of knowns. And a lot of those knowns relate to things which are actually not dependent on how good the tech is. So, so for example, one of the things we know is that companies for years have been investing in technology within their customer service organizations, frontline contact centers, etc. And in the past, every time new technology arises, it does drive benefit. It drives some productivity benefit. A few things we see, though. One is that is not consistent. Some companies implement it really well. They get all the change management right. They build the use cases in the way that is going to create the most value. And they really focus on their people change management in order to get that value. And so they become the kind of the vanguard, the figureheads of each wave of technology because they're doing something amazing. And others achieve some level of benefit, but it's never quite the same. It's not quite the same. So, the idea that everybody is going to be on the very, very best, greatest AI, completely revolutionizing their operations, that just isn't how businesses work. Different businesses have different priorities and different pieces. So there's that factor. There's also the factor that as these technologies have developed, yes, they get deployed in enterprises to create more productivity, but of course they also get deployed directly with consumers. And in fact, with generative AI, really, we've seen the adoption in the consumer space of sort of private individuals using ChatGPT or Anthropic. That's almost bigger than the enterprise adoption. And so what that means is, one is that sort of customer expectations go beyond what companies can keep up with on their enterprise. But also, the thing that's driven in the past is every time there's a new technical development, consumers' lives get more complex. Like, the classic example that I saw many times, 10, 15 years ago is when a lot of banks started to build apps for their customers to use so they could check their balance, make payments, those sorts of things. A whole new set of contact reasons arose, which was, I need help using the app. I need help logging in, those sorts of things. Yeah. And I think, we're starting to see that a bit with AI as well, as customers are using AI-based tools, there's a kind of second order set of help that they're going to need with those as well. So there's all these things lead to the idea that the idea that you're going to have some kind of AI superintelligence that's going to take away everything, that all the kind of human work that exists today. I don't think it's feasible and it's not because of the technology, it's because of the complexity of businesses and the rate of change and the types of work that needs to be done and the extreme level of flexibility. And yes, I think you could say, well, at some point you could get to some artificial general intelligence that could do those things. Like, it could genuinely replace that level of flexibility and adaptability that we have with the human workforce. But I think really in the last year or two, certainly my perspective would be, we're not getting there by making more sophisticated LLMs. Yeah. Like the newer versions of LLMs, yes, they can do more, and they can do some amazing things like creating pictures and video. Some of the LLMs that are now starting to do, a bit of reasoning, a bit of planning, and higher level task management that gets called agentic AI. Yes, it's impressive, but it's not AGI. It's not the same as a fully flexible, hyper-intelligent model that could just do anything you need it to do that's happening, and therefore could replace any task. The other thing I would say in defense of the BPOs, before I get to BPOs still need to do something very differently, but I think in defense of them, the thing that I think the pure tech players have missed is the reasons why companies outsource. It's not just a kind of cost. It's not just a cost-focused thing. It's not about just saying we want to do the same operations, but maybe we handle them offshore, and therefore it's a lower cost per activity or those sorts of things. Obviously, that is a factor in it, and that is an area where AI usually is going to create a lower cost alternative if it can replace the process like for like. But companies don't just outsource because of cost. They outsource because they consider they want to spread. How do I describe it? They want to spread the risk. Like they want another company that they are contracting with and have a legal contract with to perform a task where that other company also takes some level of accountability for the outcome. And that outcome could be customer experience, it could be retaining customers or selling to customers, or it could be collecting collecting debt, or all those kinds of activities. And part of handing that over to a human workforce to do it is you're handing the risk over. Now, I think what's interesting with, if you look at, I've yet to see a tech company that said we will manage a process for you and we'll own the risk of all of the alternative issues that could arise with that process. So yeah, let me pause there, Elvis, because I'm keen to get your point of view on this as well. But that's my sort of defense of the BPO's position.
Right.
I'll add to it and talk about what I think BPOs need to do differently. But yeah, that would be my kind of starting point.
Yeah. Great. So I'm always oscillating between, bullish and bearish, whatever my experience is with the current LLM I'm working with. And it's interesting. I mean, I've come, like you kind of hinted at, like, I don't know if we're hitting a wall exactly, but the difference between GPT-4 and GPT-5 wasn't as big as the difference between GPT-4 and 3, right? So that jump wasn't as, or 2 and 3, kind of. So the distance is getting less. But then also, am I qualified to gauge that distance? So two examples is I've recently used, ChatGPT Pro, the $200 version,
Mm-hmm.
and it does seem like the hallucinations are getting less,
Mm-hmm.
which is a huge thing. At some point, we're kind of at a tipping point, and then we're in a new equilibrium, right? When they're as super smart as they are, and they actually don't fiddle in a lie here and there, that's phenomenally better than when there's actually a blatant lie in there, right? And then just this morning, I kind of just was blown away by Claude Sonnet 4.5, the way it interacted with me. Still don't know. It's too fresh for me to, it's just like, I don't know if it just hoodwinked me and it's a new way of interacting, like challenging me a bit. But it just really felt like there was someone in there. Just like this, I don't know how well this will age, but I just felt like these were kind of jumps again that I just very recently felt that I thought, okay, maybe this is actually going in that direction, whereas before I thought it wasn't. This idea that it's actually not going in the AGI, machines of loving grace direction currently with LLMs, right? So Jan LeCun has had this criticism for a long time that LLMs aren't going to get us there.
Yeah.
I've seen that in the practical world whenever somebody said they're going to build an agent for something, and it just, whenever I looked at it, whenever maybe I've not seen the right agent builders. This is what I would like to ask you in terms of if you can speak to it. I just had a conversation with someone who I consider very smart and a good agent builder. And he said he just last weekend had to firefight because the agent he built for a company was sending out 3,000 emails to clients over the weekend, which it wasn't supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, these are the kind of funny stories that I think, okay, well, whose fault is that? Why did that happen? And is the tech ready for it? I think you're at the cutting edge at BCG, kind of advising enterprise clients and BPO clients on how to implement this technology and how to use how to do this. That's kind of your bread and butter too, right? Or am I getting that wrong? Like, I mean, it's just, you're probably
Yeah.
inside the rooms that are at the cutting edge, if anywhere, I would say in the rooms that you're in. So my short version of this question is, how good are agents today in
Mm-hmm.
beginning of October 2025? In your view, what are you seeing? And are they ready to be doing end-to-end processes, or is there a long way to go? And if it's the latter, why? Like, what are the problems?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, we have teams that are building AI agents today, and I think first of all, there's a lot of stuff gets called agentic AI. I've seen things which is, a chatbot which doesn't performs an action now gets called agentic AI, but we've had chatbots that can perform actions since, for at least the last 10 years, probably more. So in our definition, and when we talk about agentic AI, we're not really just talking about one agent. We're talking about a network of
Yeah.
agents which are brought together. A word he uses a lot at the moment is orchestration, but like what that means is a higher level agent which is making a decision on which tool to use for which job. And so we are starting to see and starting to implement tools which can perform a process end to end. So, I think a good example would be a typical back office process in an organization where maybe you need to, you're getting an input from a customer, maybe it's coming through from a contact center, maybe you need to compare some documents, come to a conclusion, maybe a bit of back and forth communication with that customer to validate to validate the information, and then reach a conclusion at the end. And it's perfectly possible to build those kinds of tools today. It's perfectly possible to put acceptable guardrails in, which will be able to monitor quality and consistency of the output, and can prevent some of those the sorts of issues you're talking about. Agents sort of going out of control. But it's not as, I think, to do that, it isn't just a case of write some prompts and you have an agent that just does everything for you. I think looking across the whole of generative AI in the last few years, I think there's two factors have driven effectively just kind of the wrong behaviors. I'm going to be a bit controversial. I think companies have made the wrong behaviors and the wrong decisions. One is we're kind of tricked by the amazing fact that an LLM doesn't need training. So the fact that it can do language, really convincing human-like language out of the box, makes you go, oh, well, it doesn't need any training because it can handle everything. Compared to, the old machine learning type natural language bots and things, which needed a huge amount of training and a huge amount of fine tuning for each individual company. And so I think that's led people to think, oh, well, this is something that's going to be easy to do because it doesn't need any training. We can just get it going straight away. We don't have to do all that kind of complicated service design or conversational design or change management that we had to do in the past. We can just do it. But of course, like the problem is flipped on its head. It doesn't need any training, but it actually needs even more design. So to design an agentic service, a huge amount of focus has to go into, well, what is the process that we want to happen? What are the things that we definitely don't want to happen? What is the level of autonomy we want to give to this agent? What are the possible combinations of things that it could do so that we can bring the right guardrails into place? So that takes time and it takes expertise and builders that really know what they're talking about. It isn't just you write a prompt and it happens. And so that's kind of mistake number one. I think mistake number two is, which does come from this kind of Silicon Valley VC mindset, is there's too much focus on what might be coming down the line in the future. Like, to me, it's not actually that interesting whether AGI is coming or not. I mean, maybe I'm being foolish there. Maybe someone can quote me, it's like the New York Times article in 1920 that said, airplanes are a dead loss or whatever, or those are the things, or Bill Gates saying that mobile phones are not going to be the future. I might be misquoting him there, but there's all those famous quotes.
I think it was computers.
It was home computers, whatever. Yeah, so there's all those famous things, but I think actually we missed is there's all the other things, which is people focusing too much on what might be coming down the line and trying to build products and solutions based on some tech that may or may not be there in the future, when LLMs have such amazing capabilities that we barely scratch the surface on what we can do with what they have today. Yeah. And I would even go as far as to say we never really mastered collectively as sort of customer service professionals. There were very, very few of the previous generation of chatbots that just use natural language processing that were really designed in a way that actually worked for customers and did the best that they were technically capable of. And that wasn't because of a technical limitation. It's because of a lack of not enough expertise, or people just didn't have enough time, or the focus was too much on we just need to get cost out and not enough focus on experience. And so I think companies, I wouldn't be, I don't think people should be spending time thinking about when are we going to get to AGI and how should we prepare for that. I think people should be thinking about how do we make use of these incredible tools that we have today, but what is the work that needs to be done to actually get them working properly for us.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, with one caveat that after AGI comes ASI, and in terms of preparing for it, societally, there's this debate to be had. There's this Eliezer Yudkowsky just came out with a book called "If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies," which I think is a title explains the book. But there's a debate to be had around that, right? But what you're saying, I would totally agree because if we end up with machines that some of these people are saying we might be having in a couple of years, then we're essentially not talking about BPO anymore. Then we're talking about how do we coexist with another species on this planet, like with whether or not it's conscious, but it's going to have goals and all that stuff, right? So let's put that aside because I don't know.
Yes,
That's for a
it's a little
different
bit higher
conversation.
level,
Yeah,
exactly, than we can focus on.
right.
I mean, I
Yeah,
would take one thing from that. One concession I would make is it's definitely true that in the wider public's understanding, LLMs came as a surprise, right? When GPT-3 came along and ChatGPT, that's what are we now? Yeah, it's 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago next month in November, wasn't it?
yeah,
And people did not people were literally wowed by that new level of capability.
yeah.
And actually that sort of stuff had been in the works for a little while. Like those that were, I spent a bit of time that 6 months before with a company called Cohere, who another LLM company, and started to see some of this stuff then, and I was amazed by it then. And then so I was kind of privileged to have that experience, and of course there are many people who knew about it well before. So that I think that shock of wow, this stuff can do way more than we thought it might be able to do. It did cause everybody to sit up, and I think it's making everyone think about the future and what might happen. But I think the answer for all of us is to get, if there's time, is to get more educated, and that's hard to get educated in a world where there is a lot of hype. A lot of that hype is you know out there for reasons which are not just about how we all get educated about it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's,
So just to close out on that,
mm,
close that loop. I think it's even more than that. I think it's audience capture, and that's a problem that we have across the spectrum in all fields currently. So, whatever path you've built an audience on or a funding or whatever is the path that you keep going down and double down on. That's what's kind of breaking our societies into echo chambers and in along many fields of discourse. I think that's a problem. So we have these super smart people, some of whom are saying we're going to have AGI soon and it's great, probably, and some of whom are saying we're going to have AGI soon and it's terrible, and some of whom are saying we've hit a wall. And each of them are, with every post they put out, are doubling down and tripling down on their own points, on their own narrative, and not moving towards each other, moving further away from each other. That's a topic that I see that across, discourse in society currently for different reasons, I think. Let me get back to BPO though, please.
yes, right. And so
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. So, but I think what that emphasizes is there is more. If we think focus around customer service operations, there is more value literally to go after by optimizing and making use of these incredible tools where we've barely scratched the surface on them than there is on trying to design for a future that we don't understand or can't predict.
yeah,
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
right. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So on that note, are you bullish or bearish on BPO for the Global South? And this is my context is we're interested in job creation in sub-Saharan Africa because of demographics and income inequality or poverty reduction through export-led growth in the services industry. So you have a Teleperformance and a Concentrix. They each have over 50,000 people on the continent, and can that turn into millions or not? And if so, how? What do we need to be doing as ecosystems? You mentioned people who are good at building AI agents. What kind of technical capability? In the past, it was, if you learn Python, you're going to be all right. I mean,
Mhm.
is that still the case? Is that what you need to be doing now? I mean, and for the BPO sector, do you need some basic AI literacy, or is that something you can pick up on your first week at the job? Or is that something we, as an ecosystem, we should prepare people for? Or would you say, uh, it doesn't matter that much anymore anyway, because as great as the BPO industry is, the head count isn't actually going to grow from here on out. It's actually going to slightly shrink or significantly shrink. Is there do
Mhm.
you have a vision there?
Yeah. Maybe if it's helpful, I can kind of start at the high level, think about the BPO industry as a whole, then we can
Yeah,
talk
please.
about
Yeah.
Africa, and then we can talk about the individuals. The important context for the BPO industry as a whole. And by the way, when I talk about BPO, most of my work is in what's called CX BPO, or customer experience, customer service BPO. It typically means front office contact centers, and maybe some sort of back office processing work. But there's different types of BPO as well. Of course, you've got
Sorry, if you don't mind, can we
yeah.
just kind of unpack that a little bit? Because the
Okay.
big BPOs that I see coming across the cities in Africa that I'm in have mostly front office work,
Yes.
customer experience, but then they've moved
Yes.
into trust and safety. They've moved into now it's reinforcement learning and doing, data labeling, image annotation. You're doing
Mhm.
kinds of back office work because front office is shrinking a little bit. So they're the same companies, kind of, right? Like doing the front and
Yeah,
back.
yeah. So yeah, I mean the companies you've talked about. So yeah, Teleperformance, Concentrix, Foundever, etc. They're in the category of what's usually called CX BPO. So it means the majority of their business is customer service, customer experience. There are then a whole swathe of other types of BPO companies. There's companies that specialize more in back office, but also support functions. So HR operations, procurement, etc. So a company like Genpact would be well known there, and then a lot of the big IT companies like TCS, Accenture, for example, they have a BPO division that might run whole IT. They run IT departments, but they also run some of those other operations as well. Some of them also do a bit of front office. So it's kind of overlapping. And then there's all kinds of really specialist BPOs. So there's BPOs that will focus around, employee benefits, or the specialist healthcare type services, those sorts of things. So it's a very big fragmented industry. I think, yeah, you're right. The majority of what we're seeing in Africa, and I think what I would want to talk about today and focus on is the CX BPO companies. So focusing in on those. Important context is those companies are coming off the back of 20 to 25 years of pretty non-stop fast-paced growth. And driven by a number of waves of changes in how companies work. So particularly offshoring, of course, has driven a lot of the growth there. But also, importantly, digital has really driven that. So because for example, for lots of reasons, companies have started to use chat as a contact method. That's much more common to use that use an outsourcer to work with that. Digital also enables you to, and digital and automation enables you to break processes down into different steps, and so you can outsource some of it but not all of it, or you can outsource certain contacts from customers, and certain ones you might want to keep onshore and in-house, those sorts of things. So technology has enabled them to do more, and BPOs have grown their own capabilities as well to be where they maybe started out as being pure kind of head people shops. They provide people to answer the phone, to being much more providing full servicing, focus much more on outcomes. So customer satisfaction, resolution of issues, those sorts of things. So they've grown in maturity. Some years in the mid 2010s, if you look at, say, the Philippines, obviously a very large outsourcing region, the headcount grew by 20% every year. Like, it was really, really strong growth. The last big bump of growth happened during the pandemic, maybe unexpectedly for people, but what the pandemic did is it created a lot of additional customer demand, lots of customer people at home, lots of need for flexibility, and BPOs were able to respond to that. And depending on the regions they were operating in, were able to kind of create that capacity to support that demand needed. And if you look at these BPOs, their very highest valuations were typically happening around 2021, 2022 for the publicly traded ones. What we've seen in the last few years is much, certainly for those publicly traded companies, a fairly sharp drop in their share price. And if you look at the results, some of those are still growing, but broadly it's looking a bit flatter than it was. Some of those companies are still doing very well from a margin perspective, so they're still very profitable, but not all of them. So there's quite a wide range of profitability that we see. In terms of overall seat count being, the number of customer service representatives. If you look at data for the USA, last year it went down by 5%. It's never gone down by that much before. Okay, so even during, let's say, the great financial crisis, 2008, 2009, it was going down by about 2% a year, 2 to 3% a year. One year shift 5%. In the Philippines, as I mentioned, it is still growing, but it's not growing at the same rate that it was before the headcount. So I think it's fairly safe to say that globally, overall, the headcount is flattening, and there are no short-term signs that it is going to increase. I think we're not at the point where we're seeing like global reduction. But I think in some of the key markets, so for example, US companies that are outsourcing, there is potentially a bit of a softening there. Yes, and it's specifically from the US. Now, the next question is what is driving that? Because obviously, I guess the most obvious thing is, yes, it's AI. There's some AI and some automation. I think, and from the data I've seen and the conversations I've had, I think AI is a minority driver of that. Okay, at the moment. That's not to say it won't be a bigger point in the future, but AI is driving a bit of demand reduction. I think what we see is much more so is that there is a readjustment of what companies want to spend on customer service. And that's driven by overall economic conditions, but also a kind of readjustment from there was a big increase in spend during that pandemic period. And we're just seeing the results of that. And this follows what we've seen historically is customer service headcount typically follows economic conditions, so economic growth, more so than it does technical developments. When times are good, people do invest in customer service because it helps companies to grow. That's what they really care about. When times are bad, companies need to cut costs, drive things more efficiently, and that's customer service is one of those areas where you see some of that cost cutting happening. And it just happens that AI is the tool one of the tools that's being deployed now to enable that. Sorry, Elvis, go on. Yeah.
No, so from a global South perspective, the picture gets muddied because a lot of times driving efficiency when times are tough leads to what we perceive as growth because outsourcing actually is cost cutting. So you try to automate more and you try to offshore, not outsourcing, because you're offshoring, right? So onshore to offshore. So that dynamic, and you were referencing your piece that I highly recommend that we'll put a link to. The drop after the pandemic was much steeper than the drop after the financial crisis, right? In terms of employment in the US.
Yeah.
But then I would argue, so two things that I might challenge you a bit on, because the increase before the pandemic, even with like this shift to e-commerce, right? From 2016, 17, 18, 19, and then this explosion in growth of BPO, CX BPO in 2020, 21, that coming sharp back down, that's like these one-time COVID service measures that related to COVID, right?
Yeah.
That peak was much higher than the past one, right? In terms of this was the pandemic wasn't just an economic downturn, it was also a boost, as you mentioned, right? It's also a boost for BPO.
Yes.
And that coming back down to normal. Now you mentioned that part, but the macroeconomy, kind of the BPOs blaming the macroeconomic sentiment more so than AI or only the macroeconomic sentiment in the buyers, leading them to offshore more, which is kind of pushing down revenue in the short term for BPOs also. That AI is not leading the enterprise to this is coming somewhere, that AI is not the reason for why enterprise clients aren't buying more BPO services or engaging in bigger contracts. It's the macroeconomic condition, the sentiment in the enterprise. I'm still wondering if that's not indirectly related, because if I'm an enterprise client, and please, am I going to go into a longer term contract with a BPO now? Or might I just wait for the next level, the next ChatGPT that comes out to see what the next thing can do? And we just do smaller things here with the BPO. So offshoring is getting more, right? It's growing. You said it's not growing as fast in the Philippines, but we are seeing kind of in other areas, like for TP said they have 70,000 people in India and they want to grow that to 150,000 by next year. Now that may be just one case of just
Hmm.
one company wanting to do that, but this strong trend towards offshoring being a kind of a short-term drag on revenue more so than automation, like meaning AI-ification, um, using AI to do things instead of people. But is that not kind of baked into the formula? Why are the enterprise clients not using as much BPO, like
Yeah.
leaning
It-
into
it-
it?
yeah. Well, I think it's, I think, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think it's impossible to separate macroeconomic sentiment from AI at the moment because so much macroeconomic sentiment is, if not driven by AI, it's all through the lens of AI. So,
Yeah.
for example, if you're a head of customer service in a large organization, no one at the C-suite level is going to say, "Hey, have some more money for more people." They will say, we here's some capex to invest in AI, and off the back of that, we expect some kind of value. So whether that's some cost saving or whether it's better productivity or better customer experience, something that is quantifiable value though. So what that means that we see in it, the way that that's mostly hitting BPOs is it's not so much about a volume reduction because volume is driven by customer demand. Like volume is just a reality thing. You
Yeah.
can't change the fact that a customer has demand unless you get rid of that demand
Right.
or you fully automate it. So that depends on whether it works. But where the sentiment drives it is largely around price. So there's a lot of price pressure in the market. And typically the outcome of that price pressure is offshoring. And that might be driven by the client company saying, we are comfortable, we would like to do this work offshore. Or it might be even driven by the BPO themselves saying, in order for us to provide this service to you at the price that you need, we would need to have a mixed or move more of the stuff offshore. And part of that is also looking at, because we should talk about Africa, is new locations where there is a less mature offshoring market, which means the main impact you see there is higher employee retention, which improves the underlying economics of delivering it, and of course in locations where the costs are just lower anyway. I want to get in how BPOs are going to make money out of AI because I think that's important.
Please, please. Yeah. Yeah.
Because this is so as I say, there's a cost pressure on their core business more so than there is a volume pressure on their core business. There may be some volume pressure in the future, but it's more about really, I think at the moment, about margin. Like how do you deliver stuff as efficiently as possible? And then, but at the same time, there are also ways they need to adapt in order to get success with AI. There's basically 5 ways that AI can help BPOs. Some of them you've mentioned already. So the first would be around kind of providing data services, maybe even directly to AI companies themselves. So that would be tagging, annotation, you
Like
talk
the
about trust and
input to
safety.
building them. Yeah.
Yeah, like managing, and maybe it's also doing to the output, but it's specifically it's AI. It's work that supports the build and running of AI services, but
Got
it's
it.
the kind of back office human work that's needed to be done. So that's the first one. The second then is providing kind of AI enhanced offerings to their clients. So this is, we offer our the standard thing we have today, but we're using AI to make it more efficient or more effective. So we have our own proprietary AI that's assisting a human customer service representative to handle more contacts or to answer more effectively, provide better satisfaction, those sorts of things. That's number two.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
third one, which is very nascent, it would be more like a sort of full agentic service. So it's like we will build a process end to end, majority delivered through AI, which we own and manage and deliver for you. And there's some kind of human backup for that if for exceptions and those sorts of things. But it's a kind of pure end to end service.
Yeah.
So those are the three where there's a lot of focus because they're the kind of exciting thing. That's like, well, that's like new revenue, or it's an obvious way of using AI in order to create a new business. The other two, I don't think get enough airtime. So the first is, so number four is offering services, so using AI to enable outsourced services which previously would not have been outsourced. So one really obvious one here is languages. So, or certainly would not have been offshore. So using, particularly in chat, real-time translation means that you could serve in Nairobi, you could have somebody that's interacting with a customer in Danish.
Yeah.
But, that person is speaking English,
Yeah.
or
German,
English or German or whatever, any language. Yeah. So,
well, but those, especially Germany and Scandinavia, those are the huge markets, right?
well, there's certainly markets where historically, there's not been a lot of. Well, Germany, there's a bit of offshoring, or nearshoring, but not so much from the Nordics. Yeah, exactly. So there's those sorts of things, but there's also it's not just about language. There's processes which previously, sometimes people don't want to outsource something because it's too complicated or there's too much risk involved with it. So that might be, I don't know, like managing fraud or those sorts of things, fraud investigations for your organization. Now, a human agent support, a human operator supported by AI, that puts enough sort of control and monitoring in place to mean that you might be comfortable outsourcing that. And we're certainly seeing that in some financial institutions, particularly because fraud is such a big driver of demand at the moment. Again, a type of demand which is created by AI as customers are getting defrauded by deep fakes. So companies have to invest to be able to solve that. And so that some of that, because the demand is so high, fraud complaints, claims, those sorts of things, we're seeing a bit more outsourcing in those areas as well. So that was number four. That's one I think that sort of doesn't get talked about much because it's a kind of second order impact, but it's actually quite a big opportunity. And then the final one, which also doesn't, is the sort of the human side of implementing change. So companies that have got quite mature in building, AI copilots and deploying those, what they've learned is whatever effort it felt like to build the copilot in the first place, the real effort only starts after you're deploying it and you're driving the change management, making sure people are using it effectively, those sorts of things. So many companies I work with where they've deployed an agent assist tool where they said, well, what we found was that our human agents, they were using the tool, and then they would do, or one way around, they would do a process, and then they'd use the tool to check whether they'd done the process correctly or not. Or they'd use the tool, read the answer, and then they kind of go back to the old process that they did anyway. So they're effectively taking longer to do the work than beforehand because they're sort of double checking the work. So all of that kind of thing. One thing that BPOs are very good at doing, or some of them are very good at doing, is process change and ensuring, bringing people along and getting people to change how they're working, those sorts of things. And often they can do that a better job of that sometimes than companies can do in-house. So that's the kind of number five there. So those last two, which are much more about growing your core business, and the core things that you have always been skilled at doing, are as important as doing the sexy new kind of data and AI type services as well.
Yeah. Can you explain the fifth one to me again a bit more, like about the processes? So is that a BPO coming into your company kind of like a BCG would and giving people better AI literacy in real time? Is that what you're saying?
It's more like saying let's say I as a company have a large, very manual customer service operation today. I need to transform that operation into being a kind of AI-enabled bionic organization, humans and AI working in partnership. I could do that in-house, which might mean I might need to hire. That's something BCG, we do. We work with companies, and we would do a lot of work around change management, and we recognize the amount of effort that's needed to be done to do that. Or I could ask a BPO to. With the BPO model, it's less a consulting model, although we are seeing that a little bit. It's more to say the BPO just comes and runs the organization and drives the change. So they own the outcome of it, which is a better running, better, better performing operation at the end. But they do that by actually running it. They're not just consulting on it. And so that's a kind of advantage the BPO can have because they can do that stuff. So yeah, I think that's more that how you use AI in order to grow your core business alongside the newer and more, maybe the things that people see as being more exciting.
That's fascinating because that reminds me kind of swapping out big steam engines with electrical motors and actually down the line understanding that there's actually more things we can do with electrical motors, not just have the motor itself be better. So your first three steps is just having one big electrical motor versus one steam engine. And the last two are kind of, okay, well, what's coming out of this that is actually innovative, what we can create. So if I can, we're just coming up on time because I'm really interested in how do we as an ecosystem train for this. If you're looking at a large BPO, say you have a, excuse me, say you have a Concentrix with 430,000 people, and I just wrote kind of down your point two. So you have data. Point one is data RLHF. Point two, I just wrote down IX Hero, kind of the support, and at TP the counterpart would be like kind of maybe Emma. And then point three is what I would call IX Hello or Parloa kind of at TP, the counterpart. Like how do you have a fully agentic thing? Sorry, your points, your point three. And then point four and point five, when you're saying point five, BPOs can do that. How many of those 430, and let's be company agnostic, how many of a 500,000 people in your company are the types of people that can do that? Or are you talking about the top 8% of like the kind of the catalyst business of the of the industry that is really kind of pushing into that higher value segment of actually kind of managed services, of actually becoming an AI consultancy? And then the question becomes again, can you do that from Africa? And what do you do with the rest of the people? Are they able to switch quick enough? Like, what makes you say that a BPO can do that? Because they know the processes well, or because they have the people who already maybe have better knowledge of? Because we all, AI is, I mean, you were 6 months early, but for the rest of us, it's 3 years old.
Mhm.
Like, so we're all kind of getting to know these aliens.
Yeah, I think in terms of your talent, there's there's really three cohorts to think about. There's the leadership of the organization. There are your specialists who are going to be building, shaping, governing, improving AI tools specifically. And then there's all of your, the vast majority of people that work for BPOs are the frontline workforce themselves, the people who are directly serving customers. So if I take those three in turn, I think what we're seeing for leadership is it's a real, there's the really massive change of the culture and behaviors and what people are and strengths that are needed around. If I was to characterize historically a BPO, like what makes a good BPO leader is someone who is amazing at service delivery. Like you just get the job done, you do it really efficiently, you understand in deeply all of the levers that you can pull to improve that, and you just present, it's really about competence. Like you really just, you know how to deliver the service in a great way and you impress the clients. I think in the future, yeah, and part of that comes from doing this, like, people might say this is slightly unfair, but I think like a lot of the skill for that comes from knowing how to do the same thing over and over again. It's like, how do we build an operating rhythm? The rhythm of this organization is this: we do these checks, we focus on these KPIs. This is how we hire people. All of that stuff. And so really skilled BPO leaders often they're very comfortable in that world where like we play the same playbook over and over again. In future, it's quite different because you need to be able to manage. You need to be not just managing change, but you need to be driving change, like working alongside your clients to identify opportunities for them to create value, being comfortable with commercial models which have a bit more risk associated with them, but also being comfortable about how you manage that risk and do that effectively. And of course, having some of the technical knowledge to know how to build. So there's that piece. That's for your levers. That's for your leaders. Of course, the companies also need to hire or train people to build AI or work, with partnerships. But even if you work with partnerships, you still need people internally who are going to be able to build stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's absolutely. And then for the frontline workforce, what we see as success is, yes, there is some degree of like technical knowledge is going to be important, and hopefully it's just going to be interesting. Like that's a useful thing to know anyway. But it's also companies are looking for very different skills around how people engage with customers. So if you think about a future where the human representatives are there really to handle exceptions, complicated things, value-adding conversations, so maybe there's more sales involved. You really want people who are going to be able to win with customers. Like they can, solve problems at a higher level. They're able to influence across the organization. They're able to show a very deep level of empathy. All of those things are skills that are going to be important. And so BPOs, in order to get that, you've both got to hire from the right places and train people in the right way, but you've also got to retain people for longer. I mean, you can't really sustain that with a model where, you have 60 to 70% annual churn, which you do in some territories. So I think if you want to talk about Africa in particular, I mean, I think that there's opportunities across all of those areas, partly because, some of those regions of Africa where we're seeing growth in BPO, it's a relative blank slate of well-educated people. You know this better than I do, Elvis. I've heard you talk about this. The level of entrepreneurialism that exists in some of these areas, like far outpaces what you might see in the global north. And so the ingredients for those skills are there. I think what it takes is a high degree of top-down coordination to make sure those skills are being deployed in the right way, and that's a big journey that the big BPOs are embarking on at the moment.
Yeah, great. Listen, Nick, I know you got to run. I got one last question. Maybe you can round it off for me.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember in the 2010s, we had like the manufacturing debate. Remember 3D printing, and every time there was a new technology, we talked about reshoring, right? We're going to have factories without people in manufacturing. And this term reshoring, if you go on Google Scholar and you type it in, it's kind of prominent in the literature. I haven't heard it on any of the earnings calls in the BPOs in terms of would there be reshoring now with fewer people doing higher value work closer to the market? I haven't currently seen it. What I'm seeing is more offshoring. You may
No,
please
I'd agree.
disagree with me.
Yeah.
The one thing that I'm interested in is maybe this is something we can close on a I don't want to lead the question, not on an optimistic or a pessimistic note. Your fourth point, offshoring due to new technology, new ways of using technology, and by that, of course, I mean like this falling of the Tower of Babel, kind of like, can we have my AirPods next year talk to me in English, whereas you're actually speaking in Amharic or in Swahili, and I actually understand it in real time, and it even sounds like you, right? We're not far away from that. And what would that open up in terms of, offshoring with new technology, young entrepreneurial, like hungry people working hard and being able to serve markets they haven't been able to serve before. So that kind of conundrum between new technology leading to reshoring, fewer people in the higher end segments versus more people being able to serve, like more white space on the map in the CX world, where you actually don't have to wait as long to get an expert on the phone because you can get one in Kenya speaking German.
Yeah, let me answer those in reverse order. I think the translation piece is that on chat, this is a classic example actually. In chat, it exists today, like perfectly. It's brilliant. It's not being fully utilized yet. So the gap between what is possible technically and what people are doing is wide enough that there is a huge amount of opportunity there, particularly as companies look to grow chat as a channel. It makes sense to do that. Voice, I think that there are some just fundamental issues with voice. Things like, in German, often you'll say sentences with the verb at the end of the sentence.
Right.
you can't translate that easily to English, where the verb is always the second word of the sentence. So
Yeah. You don't know what I'm saying until the very end of
until
the
you get to the
sentence.
end. So
Yeah.
you're always going to have this slightly kind of stunted piece. Now, not to say that that isn't something that will be relevant. I'm sure tech will come into play that's able to predict and be better at that. But it's that there's always going to be some level of compromise there. But I think, again, this is an example of, well, could you use that tool to provide an enhanced level of service? Maybe it can be 24/7 because we have an offshore
Yeah.
overnight service, which you didn't have before. Those are the kind of opportunities. And so then how that then leads us to reshoring. In my experience, reshoring, this goes back to what I was saying right at the beginning. Like, it's more driven by macroeconomics than by technology. Reshoring happens when growth is happening because companies see it as it's something that they want to promote to customers. They will, particularly be investing in, more premium services for their higher value customers. Those sorts of things is driving growth. In periods of economic growth is typically when we see the reshoring happen because it's driving a customer experience with an intent to eventually create growth.
Right. Right. Listen, Nick, this is not over. We need to speak about this more. If you'll come on again in a couple months, and we'll just kind of pick it up from there. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for kind of opening up. I mean, these 5 areas, that was really insightful for me to kind of learn about, like, your framing of this and your kind of deep knowledge of kind of understanding of where is this intersection going. And that's fascinating. Thank you for being here, man.
You're very welcome. Great to speak, and I'll see you soon, Elvis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.